There are two books in the Old Testament that focus on women, Ruth and Esther. And today I'd like for us to look at the book of Esther. It concerns a Jewish woman who became the queen of Persia and who became a heroine to the Jewish people. She is still commemorated by some Jews today at a festival some of them celebrate called Purim. Now there is some disagreement about when the events in the book of Esther took place. It is set in Persia during the time of a certain Persian king, but the name of the king given in the Bible is not the same as the name of the kings in the historical record, so it's impossible to know exactly when it occurred. The majority of biblical scholars believe that it occurred sometime between the years 486 and 424, and that means that Esther is the latest book chronologically in the entire Old Testament. Now, if you remember your Old Testament history, remember the Hebrews left Egypt under Moses. They wandered in the wilderness. Under Joshua, they entered the Promised Land, established a kingdom there with David and Solomon. When Solomon died, the kingdom split. The northern part, called Israel, was taken over by the Assyrians. The southern part, called Judah, was taken over by the Babylonians. And then later, the Babylonians were taken over by the Persians. And the Persians allowed some of those Judeans that wanted to go back, and some of them did, but most did not. The great majority of them did not go back. They continued to live in Persia, and that's what the book of Esther concerns itself with. Now, it is not clear if the book of Esther is intended to recount something that actually happened, or whether if it is literature. There are other books of the Old Testament that raise the same question. The book of Job, the book of Song of Songs. Many scholars believe that those are not reporting things that happened, but they were literature. So we do not know if the book of Esther is intended to report something that actually happened, or if it is literature. But be that as it may, Esther was a woman, a Jew who lived in Persia. She was young, she was beautiful. Her parents died when she was very young, and she was raised by her uncle, a man named Mordecai. And the way the book of Esther begins is the king of Persia, Ahasuerus, is giving a big party. It lasted for 180 days. And he gives a party for the men. His wife, Queen Vashti, gives a party for the women. And as the 180 days come to a close and the party begins to wind down, he wants to show off his wife to the men. And so he sends to her and she says, "No, I'm not coming." And this makes him mad. And the people around him says, "Look, everybody knows you've told her to come. If she doesn't come, it's going to set a bad example. Because all the wives throughout the whole kingdom are going to say, 'Well, if the queen doesn't obey her husband, then I don't have to obey you.'" So they say, "Don't let her get by with this." So he says, "Come," and she said no. He divorced her and banished her from the kingdom. Now, after a while, he regretted doing that. And he was really depressed over his wife being gone. So the people around him proposed, "Well, why don't you find another wife?" He said, "We'll get all of the most beautiful women to come, and you can meet them, and you can choose you a new wife." And so that's what they do. They bring all these beautiful women in, let the king meet. It takes a year. Esther is one of the ones that come in. And she comes in to sort of audition, I guess, for the wife of the king. And her uncle had said, "Don't let anybody know you're Jewish," if she keeps that secret. The queen immediately loves her, and she becomes his wife and the queen of Persia. Now, Esther's uncle, Mordecai, is an important person in his own right, and he has access to many important people. He keeps secret that he's Esther's uncle, and no one knows about that connection. Now, one day, Mordecai just happens to hear two men plotting. They're going to want to kill the king. And so he tells Esther this, and she tells the king, and she also tells the king who Mordecai is. So those who were plotting to kill the king were arrested and executed, and the king is grateful to Mordecai. And sometime later, the king appoints a man named Haman to be his second in command. And he orders all the people to bow down before Haman, just like bow down before the king. Now, for some reason that's not explained, Esther's uncle Mordecai refuses to do that. And so that makes Haman mad. He knows Mordecai is a Jew, and he goes to the king and tells him that all the Jews should be killed. He tells the king the Jews are different. They don't observe the same kinds of laws as everybody else. And they don't need to be able to live here because they might eventually undermine the power of the king. So the king says, well, you're right. And he issues an order that on a certain date, anyone throughout the whole kingdom who wants to kill Jews and take their property is free to do so. So Mordecai hears of this and tells Esther she must intervene with the king and stop it. But Esther's afraid to go to the king and tell him that she's a Jew. She's afraid he'll have her killed too. She knows she can't just barge in on the king. If she tries to go in without being summoned, he could have her put to death. Mordecai, though, tells her that she must do it. So she puts on her most beautiful clothes, fixes herself up as pretty as she can. She goes into the king. If he's mad, he can have her killed for barging in. But the king sees how beautiful she is, and instead of being mad, invites her in. He's so happy to see her. And he said, I'm so happy to see you, I will grant you anything you request. Her request is simple. She says, I want to have supper with just you and Haman. And the king agrees. He calls Haman in, and they sit down to eat. After they eat, the king tells her again he'll grant any request she wants. And she said, well, I'd like the three of us to eat together again. Now, in the meantime, Haman leaves, and he's very proud of himself. He's just had supper with the king and queen. He's a very important person. On the way home, he meets Mordecai. And Mordecai refuses to bow down to him, and this makes him furious. He's just left having a private meal with the king and queen. How dare him not bow down? So he goes home, and he tells his wife how mad he is at Mordecai. And his wife said, well, why don't you just build a gallows and hang the man yourself? So Haman and his sons go out and build the gallows. Now that night the king is unable to sleep. He tosses and turns in the bed. He calls his officials and has them read out the official history books. And he gets to the part about Mordecai, about what Mordecai did to save his life. And he realizes he never properly rewarded Mordecai for that. So the next morning, Haman comes in. He's just finished building the gallows to hang Mordecai. And he's coming to ask the king for permission to hang him. But before he can do that, the king says, I want you to tell me how I can best reward Mordecai for saving my life. Anyway, whatever happened, what ended up happening was that Haman has to dress Mordecai up in the best clothes and ride him around town on the best horse. He came in, won't ask permission to hang him. Now he's got to parade him around town. But he has to do it. He has to go back that evening, though, and have supper again with Esther and the king. So as supper draws to a close, Esther decides to tell the king the truth. She says, someone wants to kill me and my people. The king is furious and demands to know who it is. She says, well, I'm a Jew. And Haman is the one who convinced you to allow the Jews to be killed. The king is furious. He gets up and storms out. And when the king leaves, Haman starts apologizing to Esther. And he begs her to intervene with the king and save him. He throws himself down on her bed, begging, just as the king comes in. And there the king comes in, and he sees Haman laying on that bed, and he thinks he's trying to seduce Esther. So the king orders Haman to be hung on the very gallows that he built to hang Mordecai on. The king then appoints Mordecai as his new second in command, and he and Esther work together. The first thing they do is ask the king to rescind the order. Remember, that's still standing, that on a certain day, anyone who wants to kill a Jew can do so and confiscate their property. But the king says, I can't undo an order once it's issued. I can't undo it. So he issues a new order that gives Jews the right to defend themselves. So when that date comes, when people come to kill the Jews fight back and kill those who were trying to kill them. It takes them 2 days to defeat everyone who came to kill them. But the Jews don't stop there. They go even further. They not only kill the people that came to kill them, they slaughter 75,000 more just to take revenge. And so, from that day on, Mordecai and Esther declare that the Jews are to celebrate that in their festival of Purim, how they slaughter a bunch of people. So Mordecai continues on as the king's second in command, and it tells us that he promoted the welfare of the Jews. So that's the book of Esther. It's the story of a woman who did something to save her own ethnic group. Now there's something unique about the book of Esther that makes it different. There's no mention of God in it. And neither is there any mention of religion. The Jewish people are mentioned, but not as a religious group, as an ethnic group. Neither Esther nor Mordecai are portrayed in any way as being religious. If religion and God played a part in their lives, it is not mentioned. And so the book of Esther can be troubling. It is a secular book. On one hand is the story of a woman who seemingly risked her life to save her ethnic group. But on the other hand, it's a story of bloody revenge. And that's what the Jews actually celebrate at Purim. Remember, they not only defended themselves, they slaughtered 75,000 more just in an act of revenge. So you might ask, why is this in the Bible? Remember, there's nothing in there about God or religion. I think what we're seeing here is a development within Judaism, obviously. What we saw first in the Old Testament, like in the book of Exodus, was a Hebrew religion centered around land and getting that land. Their religion revolved around them having a certain piece of land where they could have their own government, their own society. But they lost that, remember, when they got taken over by the Babylonians and the Persians. They no longer had their land. Their home was now somewhere else, and they liked it there. And so over time, their religion developed into something different. It was no longer religion about a certain piece of land. It became a religion about a certain group of people. And for many Jews, it became not a religion at all. It became an ethnic identity. I don't remember the exact percentage, but for the people in the world that identify themselves as Jewish today, I think it's about 75% considered Jewish to be an ethnic identity rather than a religion. So the religion became about a group of people who maintained their identity by participating in certain observances and certain rituals every year. So most Jews eventually became defined not for their belief in God, but for their practicing certain rituals or going through certain practices. An identity based on observances. And Purim is one of them. Now, Purim is not one of the major Jewish holidays, but many Jews do observe it. It usually falls somewhere in the middle of March, and it just happens to be this coming Friday. Now, as with most Jewish holidays, it's principally observed by eating certain foods. Wine is usually drunk, and among many it is customary to drink wine to excess and get very drunk. Fried pastries filled with filling containing prunes and poppy seeds are eaten, and these are shaped in triangles and are referred to as Haman's ears. Remember, Haman was the bad guy in the story. Different kinds of seeds and nuts are eaten. Dumplings filled with chicken or liver are served in soup, and there are also special kinds of breads. But you know, we Christians observe holidays too. We don't observe Jewish holidays, but we have Christian holidays. We have the seasons of the church year, the celebrations that we do over and over every year. It's observing special days and special seasons, and it is done as a remembrance of things in the past. It's a cycle of regular observances repeated every year. And there's nothing wrong with that. Observances are good. This past Wednesday was Ash Wednesday, and that begins the season of Lent, which we are in now. Now, Lent is the time to think about the time going up to Jesus' crucifixion. And it's good to remember those things. The church calendar, with its various seasons and regular observances, commemorate the main events of the life of Jesus every year. And that's important because Christianity is based on Jesus and what happened to him. But we need to keep in mind that in the final analysis, Christianity is not about observances. It's about how you live your daily life. You don't live your daily life any way you want to, then have some kind of observance or go through some special deal, some ritual, and then put your religion in the closet until the next one. That's not the way it works. Christianity is a religion that is lived in our daily lives, the way we live our daily lives. Christianity should permeate every part of our daily lives. Christianity is lived in the real world, not in the world of religious observances. Maybe that's why God is not mentioned in the book of Esther. For whatever reason the book of Esther may have been written and put in there, maybe God is using it to tell us something. A religion of observances may in fact be an empty religion. A religion without God. A religion of observances and yearly seasons and holy days, might eventually become just about those things instead of about God in our daily lives and about how we live our daily lives. So as we enter the season of Lent and come up on the yearly remembrance of the crucifixion of Jesus, we do need to remember that. But it's very much more important to remember that we need to be Christians every minute of every day of our life.